When Keanu Reeves attended a local charity orphanage, everything seemed perfect on the surface. However, as he was about to leave, something important caught his attention that prompted him to take immediate action. The sun had long since set over the Hollywood Hills as Keanu Reeves finally made his way home. The day had been a blur of meetings, script readings, and a charity dinner that had run far longer than expected. As he fumbled with his keys at the front door, the weight of exhaustion settled heavily on his shoulders. Stepping into the dimly lit foyer, Keanu dropped his keys onto the console table with a clatter that echoed through the quiet house. His eyes fell on a stack of mail that had accumulated over the past week, a testament to his hectic schedule. With a sigh, he picked up the pile and made his way to the kitchen. Keanu reached for the whiskey bottle and poured himself a generous glass, the amber liquid catching the soft glow of the room's warm lighting. He held the glass for a moment, watching the light play across its surface, then brought it to his lips and took a slow, thoughtful sip. The rich, smoky flavor lingered on his tongue as he turned his attention to the stack of mail on the table beside him. One by one, he sifted through the envelopes and papers, his movements unhurried. Bills, neatly printed and impersonal, formed the bulk of the pile. A few fan letters adorned with colorful stickers or handwritten notes added a splash of humanity to the otherwise routine correspondence. He paused occasionally, setting aside promotional flyers and glossy brochures without much thought. The rhythmic motion of sorting felt oddly calming, a small reprieve from the chaos of daily life. As the pile dwindled, a plain envelope near the bottom caught his attention. Its modest design stood out. No bright logos, no heavy cardstock, just simple, unadorned paper. He set his glass down and picked up the envelope, turning it over in his hands. Something about its understated appearance piqued his curiosity. Slipping a finger under the flap, Keanu carefully opened it. Inside was an invitation from Haven Hills Children's Home, printed on unassuming stationery. They were hosting a charity event, and he had been invited as a special guest. He realized with a pang of guilt that the invitation had been sitting there unnoticed for several days. He leaned back in his chair, the glass of whiskey momentarily forgotten as he stared at the invitation. Keanu considered his schedule tomorrow and set aside the invitation brochure. He made a mental note to call his manager in the morning about it. As he continued through the remaining mail, one particular letter stood out. The handwriting was neat but showed signs of hesitation, as if each word had been carefully considered before being put to paper. Keanu opened the letter and began to read. "Dear Mr. Reeves, I hope this letter finds you well. My name is Merida Lafayette, and I grew up in the foster care system. I'm writing to tell you how much your work has meant to me over the years. Growing up without a permanent family was incredibly difficult. There were times when I felt invisible, like I didn't matter to anyone. But your movies, the characters you portrayed, they gave me hope. They showed me that even in the darkest times there can be kindness and strength. I wanted to share something that's been weighing on my mind lately. In the past 10 years, it seems like orphanages and foster kids have become even more invisible. The news is always full of political drama or celebrity gossip, but kids like me, we're forgotten. It's like we don't exist to the rest of the world. I know you're probably very busy, but I just wanted you to know that your work makes a difference. It reaches people like me, even when the rest of the world doesn't seem to care. Thank you for everything, Merida." Keanu sat back, the letter still in his hand. Merida's words had struck a chord, bringing to mind the invitation from Haven Hills. He pulled out his phone and began to research the orphanage. Haven Hills Children's Home was a small facility, tucked away in Orange County, about an hour-and-a-half drive from his home. The website was basic, showing a modest building and a handful of smiling children. It was clear they operated on a tight budget. As Keanu scrolled through the site, he found himself thinking about Merida's letter and the children at Haven Hills. Despite his packed schedule for tomorrow, something tugged at his conscience. He wondered if his presence at such a small event would truly make a difference. With these thoughts swirling in his mind, Keanu made his way to bed. As he drifted off to sleep, he made a mental note to check with his manager, Patrick, in the morning. Maybe, just maybe, he could find a way to fit the charity event into his schedule. The California sun streamed through the bedroom windows, rousing Keanu from his slumber. As consciousness slowly returned, so did the weight of his professional obligations. His phone buzzed incessantly on the nightstand, a barrage of messages and notifications demanding his immediate attention. With a groan, Keanu reached for the device. His manager, Patrick, had already sent over a detailed schedule for the day. It was packed from morning to night: a breakfast meeting with a potential director, a costume fitting for his upcoming film, a lunch interview with a major magazine, and an evening script reading for a new project. As Keanu scrolled through the messages, his eyes fell on the charity event invitation he had discovered last night. A pang of guilt hit him as he realized how easy it would be to let it slip by, lost in the whirlwind of his celebrity life. Determined to at least consider the possibility, Keanu dialed Patrick's number as he began his morning routine. "Morning, Keanu." Patrick's voice came through, crisp and professional as always. "I trust you've seen today's schedule?" "Morning, Patrick. Yeah, I've seen it. Listen, there's something I wanted to ask you about," Keanu began, his voice still rough with sleep. "Did we get an invitation from Haven Hills Children's Home for a charity event today?" There was a pause on the other end of the line, followed by a sigh. "Yes, we did. I meant to mention it to you earlier, but with everything else going on, to be honest, Keanu, I didn't think it was worth bringing up. It's a very small event. Practically no or just a few local media coverage. Not really worth your time, especially with how packed your schedule is." Keanu frowned, a mixture of confusion and concern crossing his face. "Wait, you knew about this. Why didn't you tell me sooner?" Patrick's tone turned defensive. "I did try to bring it up a few times over the past month, Keanu, but you were always so busy, and you never confirmed whether you wanted to attend or not. I assumed you weren't interested." The actor ran a hand through his hair, frustration building. He couldn't remember Patrick mentioning the event, but with his hectic schedule, it was possible he had simply forgotten. "I see," he said, trying to keep his voice neutral. "Well, I'm considering it now. Do you think we could rearrange some things to make it work?" "Keanu, I really don't think it's a good idea," Patrick insisted. "This orphanage is tiny, tucked away in the edge of Orange County. The event will barely make a blip on the local news, let alone anything significant. Your time would be much better spent focusing on your current commitments." Keanu felt torn. On one hand, Patrick's arguments made sense from a career perspective. On the other, he couldn't shake the feeling that this event might be more important than it appeared on the surface. "I understand your point, Patrick," Keanu said slowly. "But the fact that they reached out through multiple channels, management and mail, shows how much this means to them. Doesn't that count for something?" Patrick's voice softened slightly, recognizing Keanu's genuine concern. "Look, I get it. Your heart's in the right place, but you can't sacrifice your work for every small charity that comes knocking. If you really want to help, we can arrange a private visit to the orphanage another time. Today, we need to stick to the schedule we have." Keanu felt his resolve wavering. Patrick's logic was sound, and the weight of his professional obligations was undeniable. "All right," he conceded with a sigh. "You're right. We'll stick to the schedule." After ending the call, Keanu lingered for a moment, staring at his phone as though the weight of the conversation hadn't entirely left him. With a deep breath, he set it down and moved to finish getting ready, pulling on his jacket with deliberate slowness. The house was quiet except for the soft rustle of fabric and the faint of his steps. He grabbed his keys, hesitating briefly before heading out the door. The morning air was crisp, carrying with it a faint hum of the city waking up. Keanu walked with measured steps toward his usual breakfast cafe, the familiar path offering a sense of routine that grounded him. Despite the peaceful surroundings, his mind was restless, turning over the details of the orphanage event like a stone he couldn't put down. The guilt still lingered, a quiet gnawing feeling at the edges of his thoughts. He told himself he was doing the right thing by planning to attend now, even if the invitation had initially been overlooked. It wasn't perfect, but at least he was trying. When he reached the cafe, the warm scent of coffee and fresh pastries greeted him. The small, cozy space bustled with quiet energy, a mix of clinking dishes and murmured conversations. He found his usual seat by the window and settled in, placing his order with the ease of familiarity. As he waited, his gaze drifted outside, though his mind remained elsewhere, still preoccupied with the event and the broader sense of responsibility it stirred in him. The low hum of nearby voices broke through his reverie. At a table just a few feet away, two women were deep in conversation. Their tones, a mix of frustration and determination, caught his attention. "It's gotten so much harder in the past decade," one of them said, her voice tinged with an unmistakable weariness. "All the news cares about is political drama and celebrity gossip. Kids in orphanages, the elderly in care homes, they're just forgotten." She gestured emphatically, her passion evident. Her companion nodded in agreement, her expression serious. "I know exactly what you mean. It's like they've become invisible. No one pays attention unless there's some scandal or tragedy to exploit. If only we had someone who could really bring attention to the cause, you know. Someone people would actually listen to." Keanu shifted slightly in his seat, their words resonating more deeply than he expected. He took another sip of his coffee, his movements slower now, his thoughts heavier. The guilt from earlier swelled anew, joined by a sense of urgency. For the first time that morning, his focus sharpened, not just on the event tomorrow, but on what it could mean if he approached it with intention. He glanced over at the two women, their conversation still unfolding, and wondered if this was the universe's way of nudging him toward something bigger. He remembered Merida's letter from the previous night echoing in his mind. "Speaking of which," the first woman continued, "did you hear about that event at Haven Hills Children's Home today?" "Oh yeah, decided not to go though. It's so far out and the impact would be minimal, I think. Barely any media coverage. They should have tried better." Their words struck Keanu like a physical blow. Here were two people dedicated to charity work, and even they were dismissing Haven Hills as too small to matter. He thought about the children there, waiting in excitement for a special guest who might not show up. As he collected his order and stepped out of the cafe, Keanu made a decision. He pulled out his phone and dialed Patrick's number once again. "Patrick, I need you to clear my morning schedule," he said firmly, cutting off his manager's protests. "I'm going to Haven Hills." "Keanu, we talked about this." "I know we did, but this feels important. Sometimes showing up for the people who are often overlooked by society is more important than any high-profile engagement." Without waiting for a response, Keanu ended the call and headed back to his house. He grabbed his car keys, a determined glint in his eye. The journey to Haven Hills awaited, and with it, an experience that would change more lives than he could have imagined. The sleek, modern lines of Hollywood's architecture gradually softened, dissolving into the more relaxed rhythm of suburban sprawl as Keanu's car hummed steadily southward through Orange County. The towering buildings and busy streets gave way to neighborhoods lined with tidy houses, each with its own patch of green lawn and a neatly trimmed hedge. With each passing mile, the scenery shifted. The pristine uniformity of suburbia began to falter, the GPS directing him onto quieter, less maintained roads. The further he drove, the more rugged the landscape became. Sidewalks disappeared, replaced by narrow shoulders flanked by uneven ditches and the occasional cluster of scraggly trees. The manicured charm of urban planning faded, giving way to a rawer, untamed beauty. It was a landscape that felt forgotten, much like the place he was heading to. After nearly 2 hours behind the wheel, Keanu finally spotted it, a small weathered sign at the edge of the road that read, "Haven Hills Children's Home." The letters, painted in a cheerful blue that had faded over time, were accompanied by a hand-drawn image of a sun partially obscured by clouds. The sign tilted slightly, as if the earth beneath it had grown tired of holding it upright. He turned onto the gravel driveway, his car tires crunching softly over the loose stones. The sound was rhythmic, almost meditative, as he approached the modest parking lot. It was small and unpaved, with only enough room for maybe 5 cars, though only a couple of spaces were occupied. Keanu eased into a spot and killed the engine, sitting for a moment in the silence that followed. Before him stood the children's home. It was a 2-story structure that seemed to wear its years openly, with no attempt to hide them behind fresh paint or shiny new fixtures. The front steps sagged slightly in the middle, their surfaces worn smooth from decades of use. Nearby, an overgrown garden stretched haphazardly along the side of the building. Wildflowers mingled with weeds, and a lone wooden bench sat crookedly among the greenery, its paint peeling in long strips. The garden might have been charming once, perhaps even tended with care, but now it seemed like a reflection of the home itself, a place where resources were stretched too thin to keep up with time's relentless march. Keanu stepped out of the car and closed the door gently, the sound echoing in the quiet air, a mixture of determination and apprehension settling over him. This was no grand event space, no glittering venue designed to impress. It was simply a home, worn but enduring, and clearly in need of more than it had been given. As Keanu approached the entrance, he expected it to be locked, but it swung open easily. Stepping inside, Keanu found himself in a dimly lit foyer. A reception desk stood empty, a layer of dust on its surface suggesting it hadn't been used in some time. "Hello?" Keanu called out, his voice echoing through the silent hallway. No response came. The absence of any staff or the sounds of children playing immediately set Keanu on edge. He had expected to be greeted, to find some sort of event preparation underway. Instead, the orphanage seemed almost abandoned. Cautiously, he made his way down the main corridor. Faded posters about child safety and educational programs lined the walls, their corners curling with age. The linoleum floor squeaked under his feet, the sound unnaturally loud in the quiet building. As Keanu passed what appeared to be a playroom, something caught his eye. Through the small circular window in the door, he spotted two young girls, both black and around 10 years old, sitting alone in a corner. The room was dimly lit, the only light source coming from a window on the far side. What struck Keanu most was the expression on their faces. It wasn't the typical look of children at play, or even the boredom of kids stuck inside on a nice day. Instead, their eyes held a weight of sadness and fear that stopped him in his tracks. Concerned, Keanu reached for the door handle, intent on checking on the girls. Just as his hand touched the cool metal, a voice called out from behind him. "Excuse me, Mr. Reeves, I'm so sorry, I didn't hear you come in." Keanu turned to see a man jogging towards him from the other end of the corridor. He was dressed in a suit that seemed slightly too large for his frame, his tie askew as if he'd dressed in a hurry. "Victor Langford," the man introduced himself, slightly out of breath. "I'm the owner and director here at Haven Hills. We weren't expecting you. Your management never responded to our invitation." Keanu shook Victor's hand, noting the slightly too firm grip. "I apologize for the surprise visit," he said. "I only recently discovered the invitation and decided to come on short notice." Victor's smile seemed forced, not quite reaching his eyes. "Well, we're certainly glad you're here, though I'm afraid we're not quite prepared for a VIP visit." Keanu glanced back at the door to the playroom. "No problem about it, Mr. Langford. I was just about to check on those girls. They seem to be alone in there." "Call me Victor," the man said, though a flicker of something, annoyance, worry, passed over Victor's face before his professional demeanor reasserted itself. "Ah, yes. I'm afraid we've had a bit of a flu outbreak recently. Those two are currently in quarantine as a precaution. Nothing serious, I assure you. It's just that flu spreads so quickly among children, and we simply can't afford to have everyone falling ill at once." The explanation sounded plausible, but something in Victor's tone raised subtle red flags in Keanu's mind. Years of acting had honed his ability to read people, and Victor's body language spoke of someone trying very hard to control the narrative. Victor quickly steered Keanu away from the door, closing it firmly behind them. "Now, why don't I give you a tour of our facility? We're small, but we do our best with what we have." As they walked away, Keanu couldn't shake the uneasy feeling left by the girls' frightened expressions. Something about Victor's hurried explanation didn't sit right with him, but he had no concrete reason to challenge it. For now, he would have to play along and keep his eyes open. Victor Langford led Keanu away from the isolated playroom with an efficiency that bordered on haste. His professional demeanor seemed slightly forced, a veneer of pleasantness covering something Keanu couldn't quite put his finger on. "I must apologize again for the lack of reception," Victor said as they walked. We're operating on a very tight budget, and staffing has been challenging, but we make do. Keanu nodded, his mind still on the two girls he'd seen. Are you sure those girls in quarantine are okay? Maybe we should switch the light on. Oh, no need to worry about them, Victor cut in smoothly, his tone light and reassuring. We turned off the light to help them get some rest. They had a rough night. Couldn't sleep well with those stuffy noses, you know. Keanu nodded and followed Victor across the hallway. Now, Victor continued, steering the conversation, let me show you where we do most of our activities. He led Keanu to another playroom on the opposite side of the building. The contrast was stark and immediate. This room was brightly lit, filled with predominantly white children playing happily. Colorful drawings adorned the walls, and the sound of laughter filled the air. This is where our children spend most of their time, Victor said proudly. We try to create a cheerful and healthy environment despite our limited resources. Keanu watched the children play, unable to shake the memory of the two isolated girls. The difference in atmosphere between the two rooms was impossible to ignore. How many children do you care for here? Keanu asked. We currently have 10 children in our care, Victor replied. We used to have more, but funding constraints have forced us to scale back. It's a challenge, running a place like this with such a small staff. We recently had to let go of 3 of our caretakers. Now it's mostly just me, a few kitchen staff, a busboy, and our cleaning service. As they continued their tour, Victor showed Keanu the dining area, a sparse room with long tables and mismatched chairs. The dormitories were next, small rooms with bunk beds crammed close together. A multi-purpose hall doubled as a classroom and event space, its walls lined with outdated educational posters. And this is our book room, Victor said, opening a door to reveal a small space with a few shelves of worn books. We do our best to encourage reading, though new materials are hard to come by. Keanu noticed the lack of outdoor spaces for the children. When he inquired about it, Victor's smile tightened slightly. Ah, yes. Unfortunately, our limited outdoor area is mostly occupied by storage cabins and laundry facilities. Space is at a premium here, you understand. As they walked, Victor shared more about the orphanage's history. Haven Hills was once a reputable institution, you know, established in the 1950s by a kind-hearted philanthropist named Eleanor Harrington. But after Eleanor passed away, her descendants sold it to private management. The place fell into disrepair over the years. Victor's voice took on a note of pride. I took over 5 years ago, had to modernize things, make it sustainable. We limited the number of children to no more than 12. Now that I'm doing most of the care alone, we no longer accept new children, just focusing on the ones we have. Quality over quantity, that's our priority. Keanu listened, moved by the background story but unable to shake a growing sense of unease. The contrast between the cheerful playroom and the rest of the facility, the isolated girls, Victor's carefully managed narrative, it all added up to something that didn't quite fit. As they completed their tour, returning to the bright playroom, Keanu noticed something new. 2 small local news outlets had set up equipment, their cameras and lights crowding the modest space. Victor's demeanor shifted subtly, becoming more animated. Ah, perfect timing. Let's get some photos, shall we? It's not often we have such a distinguished guest. With practiced efficiency, Victor began orchestrating photo opportunities. He positioned Keanu among the happy, well-cared-for white children, his smile wide for the cameras. Now, Mr. Reeves, if you'd like to make your donation, we can capture that moment for posterity, Victor suggested, his tone honeyed with anticipation. Keanu nodded, reaching for his checkbook. As he wrote out a generous sum, camera flashes captured the moment. Victor beamed with pride, but Keanu's thoughts kept drifting to the isolated twins in the dark room. As Victor began to wrap up the event, thanking Keanu profusely for his generosity, the actor made a decision. Actually, Keanu said, his voice calm but firm, I'd like to visit the quarantined children as well. Perhaps we could take some photos there. It might help highlight the challenges you face here. Victor's hesitation was palpable. Oh, I'm not sure that's a good idea. The risk of infection. I'm willing to take that risk. A small flu won't be a trouble, Keanu insisted politely. It's important to show all aspects of the orphanage, don't you think? After a moment of visible internal struggle, Victor relented. Very well, if you insist, please follow me. As they made their way back to the isolated playroom, Keanu couldn't shake the feeling that he was about to uncover something significant. Victor led Keanu and the small media team back to the dimly lit room where the two black girls were isolated. As they approached, Keanu noticed Victor's steps becoming more hesitant, his earlier confidence wavering. Upon reaching the door, Victor paused, his hand on the handle. Now, Mr. Reeves, I must insist that we keep this brief. The girls need to rest. Keanu nodded, his eyes fixed on the small window in the door. The girls were still there, huddled in the corner, their expressions a mix of fear and curiosity at the commotion outside. Victor opened the door, flicking on the lights. The sudden brightness made the girls squint, their eyes darting nervously between Victor, Keanu, and the cameras. Keanu stepped into the room, his heart heavy at the stark contrast between this space and the cheerful playroom they'd just left. The walls here were bare, the floor cold linoleum. A few tattered books and a worn teddy bear were the only signs that children occupied this space. Kneeling beside the twins, Keanu spoke softly. Hi there, I'm Keanu. What are your names? The girls stayed silent, their wide eyes brimming with apprehension. Keanu couldn't help but notice how they seemed to shrink back in Victor's presence, though their cautious curiosity remained fixed on him. Their faces were flushed red, reaching up to their noses and ears, and while they tried to keep their arms hidden behind their backs, Keanu caught glimpses of their upper arms. The skin there appeared reddened, almost as if it had been burned. It's okay, Keanu said softly, his voice calm and reassuring. He knelt slightly to meet their eyes, his tone carrying a quiet warmth. I'm here to help and you don't need to be afraid. I heard you weren't feeling well, so I'll keep this short, I promise. One of the girls finally spoke, her voice so faint it was almost lost in the stillness. I'm Amaya, she said, glancing nervously at her sister. This is my sister, Alana. Keanu offered a gentle smile, his gaze kind. It's nice to meet you, Amaya, and you too, Alana. How are you both holding up? Before either girl could respond, Victor interjected. They've been running fevers, coughing, sneezing, all the typical flu symptoms. We're keeping them here to protect the other children. Keanu nodded, but he couldn't help noticing that neither girl appeared to have any visible signs of flu, except the red flush on their skin. No runny noses, no coughing, no wheezing. Victor invited the girls to join for a quick photo, his tone smooth and coaxing. The twins hesitated briefly but eventually complied, stepping forward with guarded expressions. The cameras flashed as Keanu posed with them, his practiced smile concealing the unease brewing inside him. His eyes flicked briefly to the girls, their reddened arms and wary demeanor only deepening his suspicions. Just as he was about to gently probe them about their health, his phone vibrated in his pocket, cutting through his thoughts. Excuse me for a moment, Keanu said, stepping out of the room to take the call. It was Patrick, his voice tense with concern. Keanu, where are you? You're late for your next appointment. Are you still at that orphanage? Keanu sighed, the weight of his professional obligations suddenly feeling very heavy. Yes, I'm still here, Patrick. I think there might be something. Keanu, I know you want to help, but you have commitments, Patrick interrupted. Are you planning to stay much longer? Feeling torn, Keanu glanced back at the room where Amaya and Alana sat. Their eyes met his through the window, a silent plea that he couldn't quite decipher. No, he said finally. No, I'm wrapping up now. I'll be leaving soon. Good, Patrick replied, relief evident in his voice. I'll see you back in Hollywood. Ending the call, Keanu pocketed his phone and turned back toward the room. As he reached for the door handle, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was missing something crucial. The uneasy feeling in his gut had only grown stronger, but with his schedule pressing down on him, he felt powerless to act on it. As Keanu re-entered the room, he was struck by a sudden change in the scene before him. The twins were no longer seated in the corner. Instead, Victor was now posing with them for the press, his hands gripping their arms with an unnatural firmness. Keanu's trained actor's eye caught every subtle detail, the tension in the girls' postures, their attempts to minimize contact with Victor, the way they tried to edge away from his touch whenever possible. Victor's smile, plastered on for the cameras, carried a sinister edge that sent a chill down Keanu's spine. "Wonderful," Victor exclaimed, his voice overly cheerful. "Mr. Reeves, would you like to join us for a few more photos?" Before Keanu could respond, one of the reporters called Victor away for a statement. The moment Victor's hands left their shoulders, Amaya and Alana retreated to their corner with alarming speed. Seizing the opportunity, Keanu approached the twins, careful to move slowly and keep his body language open and non-threatening. "Hey there," he said softly, crouching down to their level. "Amaya and Alana, do you mind if I ask you a few questions?" The girls exchanged a glance, a silent communication passing between them. Finally, Alana, seemingly the more vocal of the two, gave a tiny nod. "We're not supposed to speak with anyone, sir. We're sick." Keanu nodded. "I understand that, and I'm not afraid of the illness. I've made sure Victor knew that." He smiled. "How long have you been living here?" Keanu asked gently. 3 years, Alana whispered, her voice barely audible. "Since our parents died." Keanu's heart clenched at the pain in her voice. "I'm so sorry to hear that. And, do you like living here? Are you treated well?" The silence that followed his question was deafening. The twins' eyes, filled with a sadness far beyond their years, spoke volumes. "Are you really sick?" he asked, his suspicions growing stronger by the second. Both girls shook their heads, their eyes darting nervously to the door. Before Keanu could probe further, Victor's voice boomed from the doorway. "Well, I think that's enough excitement for our patients, don't you? The press is leaving, Mr. Reeves. Would you like to make any final statements?" Keanu stood slowly, his mind racing. He needed more time, more information. "Actually, Victor, I was wondering if we could discuss some improvements for this room. If it's going to be used for quarantine, it should be properly equipped." Victor's smile tightened ever so slightly, the change almost unnoticeable. Of course," he said smoothly, his voice as polished as ever. "I can assure you that your donation would go directly toward improving this room. Perhaps we could discuss it outside or at another time. I'm sure you have a busy schedule to return to." Keanu nodded thoughtfully. "Yes, that's good to know. I truly believe these children deserve the best care possible, especially when they're unwell. If there's one area that could use attention here, it's this room. And don't get me wrong, I'd be more than happy to contribute as a donor to support your orphanage and its mission." As they spoke, the press gathered their equipment and filed out, leaving Keanu alone with Victor and the twins. The atmosphere in the room shifted palpably, tension crackling in the air. Keanu stood his ground, his gaze shifting between Victor and the twins. The girls' fearful expressions, their silent, unspoken pleas, and the inconsistencies in Victor's story all tugged at him, signaling that something was deeply wrong at Haven Hills. The longer he studied the room and the people in it, the more he could sense Victor's carefully maintained composure beginning to waver. A faint hint of irritation and insecurity crept into his voice as he spoke, his smooth professionalism starting to unravel. "Mr. Reeves," Victor said, his tone sharp and steady despite his slipping veneer, "while we appreciate your concern, the girls need to rest now, and if you would follow me, I'll show you out." Keanu nodded and followed Victor out of the room, his steps measured but deliberate. He stole a quick glance toward the door just before Victor locked it, the sound of the bolt sliding into place, sending a sharp, final note through the air. Amaya and Alana had returned to their corner, lying down on the hard wooden floor, their small bodies curled in quiet, fragile shapes. As Keanu excused himself to his car in the parking lot and drove away from Haven Hills, the weight of the encounter lingered heavily on him. His mind felt like a whirlwind, a chaotic tangle of conflicting thoughts and emotions. The uneasy knot in his gut had grown tighter with each mile he put between himself and the orphanage. The image of Amaya and Alana's wide, fearful eyes stayed with him, their silent pleas replaying in his mind like a haunting echo. About halfway back to Hollywood, a realization hit him like a physical blow. In the rush and confusion of his departure, he had forgotten to get his copy of the donation check from Victor. It was a small oversight, but it provided a legitimate reason to return and potentially investigate his growing suspicions about the twins' treatment. Keanu pulled over to the side of the road, his heart racing. He knew returning might jeopardize his professional commitments, but the thought of leaving those children in a potentially dangerous situation was unbearable. Taking a deep breath, he dialed Patrick's number. "Keanu, where are you?" "You're cutting it close for your next appointment," Patrick answered, his voice tense. "Patrick, I need you to clear my schedule for today," Keanu said firmly, cutting off his manager's protests. "Something's come up at the orphanage. I can't explain everything now, but I need to go back." "Keanu, what's going on here? First you said to clear just your morning schedule, and now you're almost late and asking to clear the entire day. What's so urgent?" "I know we did," Keanu interrupted, "but this is important. Sometimes showing up for the people who are often overlooked by society is more important than any high-profile engagement. I need you to trust me on this." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Finally, Patrick sighed. "All right, Keanu. But you better have a damn good reason for this. The vendors and clients aren't going to be happy." "Thank you, Patrick. I'll explain everything later, I promise." Ending the call, Keanu made a quick U-turn and sped back towards Haven Hills. As he drove, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was racing against time, though he couldn't explain why. Upon arriving back at the orphanage, Keanu was struck by how different it looked in the cloudy afternoon light. The building seemed more ominous now, its peeling paint and overgrown garden hinting at neglect rather than charm. As he approached the front door, a sudden commotion from inside made him pause. The sound of something crashing, followed by muffled cries and a man's raised voice, sent a chill down his spine. Without hesitation, Keanu pushed open the door and entered. The contrast between the carefully managed atmosphere from earlier and the chaos he now heard spurred him to action. The corridors were empty, the press long gone. As he moved towards the source of the commotion, a male staff member suddenly appeared, his face a mask of panic. "Mr. Reeves, I'm sorry, but you can't be here," the man said, attempting to block Keanu's path. "This is a restricted area." Keanu stood his ground. "I heard a commotion. It sounded like someone might be in danger. I just want to make sure everything's all right." The staff member's eyes darted nervously down the hallway. "It's nothing, sir, I can assure you. It's just kitchen work. Very noisy. You really shouldn't be here. Do you need any help? Perhaps I can call Mr. Victor for you?" As the man tried to physically block Keanu's path, a surprising ally emerged. An old lady with a broom appeared, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and determination. "It's the kitchen area, sir," she said, her voice trembling ever so slightly. Keanu glanced down at her name tag and noticed the name Merida Lafayette. A flicker of recognition sparked in his mind. Lafayette. That was the same name as the one on the fan mail he read last night. "Kevin, I told you, let the man go!" The old woman's voice rang out sharply as she confronted the man blocking the way. "What? You know we're not allowed to let anyone enter the kitchen. Victor will—" Before he could finish, to Keanu's complete shock, she stepped forward and began restraining her co-worker, with the broom still in her hand. Her eyes met Keanu's with an urgent intensity as she whispered, "Go, quickly. Help the children, please." Taking advantage of the moment, Keanu pushed past them and ran towards the source of the noise. As he burst into the kitchen, the scene before him made his blood run cold. Victor stood over the cowering twins, his face contorted with rage. Surrounding them was a group of white children, their eyes wide with fear as they watched the unfolding drama. Victor's angry shouts echoed through the space. "This was an important guest. Why couldn't you two behave for once? Your kind always causes problems in my house." The other children watched in fearful silence, their eyes darting between Victor and the twins. Victor continued his tirade, his words laced with racist venom that made Keanu's stomach turn. For a moment, the room was frozen in a tableau of abuse and fear. Then, Keanu's voice cut through the tension like a knife. "What's going on here?" Victor spun around, his face a mask of shock and fear, as he realized his carefully constructed facade had crumbled. In that moment, Keanu knew he had stumbled upon a truth far darker than he could have imagined, and that his decision to return may have just saved lives. The kitchen fell silent, the echo of Keanu's words hanging in the air. Victor's face, previously contorted with rage, now cycled through a series of emotions: shock, fear, and finally, a desperate attempt at composure. "Mr. Reeves," Victor stammered, straightening his posture and forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I wasn't expecting you to return. Is there something I can help you with?" Keanu's gaze moved from Victor to the twins huddled on the floor, their tear-streaked faces a stark contrast to the carefully orchestrated scenes from earlier. The other children remained frozen, their eyes wide with a mix of fear and hope as they looked between Keanu and Victor. "What's going on here?" Keanu repeated, his voice calm but firm. He took a step into the room, positioning himself between Victor and the twins. Victor's mind seemed to race, searching for an explanation. It's not what it looks like," he began, his earlier confidence crumbling. "The twins, they disobeyed quarantine orders. They left their room, potentially endangering the other children. I was simply explaining the seriousness of their actions." Keanu's eyes narrowed, unconvinced. "Reprimanding them?" he echoed, his voice laced with disbelief. "It doesn't look like that's all you were doing." He turned slightly, addressing the twins directly. "Are you two feeling sick?" Amaya and Alana, still trembling, shook their heads in unison. Keanu turned back to Victor, his expression hardening. "They don't seem ill to me. In fact, they didn't seem ill earlier either." "Care to explain that, Victor? And what's with the red on their skin? It doesn't look like a flush, it's a burn mark." Victor's facade began to crack further. Well, you see, sometimes symptoms can be subtle and different across children. We have to be cautious, you understand, for the safety of all the children." "And does that caution usually involve shouting racial slurs at children?" Keanu asked, his voice dangerously quiet. The color drained from Victor's face. He opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. Keanu turned to the other children in the room. "Can any of you tell me what's been happening here?" There was a moment of tense silence. The children exchanged nervous glances, years of conditioning warring with the sudden hope of rescue. Finally, a small voice broke the silence. "They're always kept in that room," a 6-year-old boy said quietly, his eyes fixed on the floor, "even when they're not sick." It was as if a dam had broken. Another girl, slightly older, added, "We're not allowed to play with them. They have to stay separate all the time." More voices joined in, each revelation painting a clearer picture of the systemic abuse and discrimination that had been occurring at Haven Hills. Victor's composure completely shattered. "Shut up," he shouted, causing the children to flinch. "You ungrateful little liars. Do you have any idea where you'd be without me? On the streets." Keanu's expression hardened as he faced Victor, his body language protective as he shielded the children. "That's enough, Victor. Your actions and words speak for themselves." Victor's face contorted with a mix of rage and panic. "You don't understand," he spat. "Running this place isn't easy. Sacrifices have to be made." "These two," he gestured violently towards Amaya and Alana, "they're more trouble than they're worth. Always causing problems, always needing extra attention." Keanu's voice remained steady, though his eyes flashed with anger. "They're children, Victor. All of them are. They deserve care, protection, and equal treatment." As Victor opened his mouth to retort, Keanu pulled out his phone. "I'm calling the authorities to look at this case closer. This ends now." Victor's eyes widened in panic. "You can't do that. You have no proof. It's your word against mine, and I've been running this place for years. Who do you think they'll believe?" Keanu met Victor's gaze unflinchingly as he dialed 911. "I think they'll believe the children and the evidence of neglect and abuse that's all around us." As Keanu began speaking to the emergency operator, providing clear details about the situation and what he'd witnessed, Victor's demeanor shifted from defensive to desperate. "You can't prove anything," Victor shouted, his voice rising hysterically. "I'll sue you for defamation. Do you know what a scandal like this could do to your career? Keanu remained calm as he continued his call, his free hand gesturing for the children to stay back. The twins, Amaya and Alana, had slowly begun to inch towards him, seeking protection. Suddenly, Victor's eyes darted to the stove where a pot of water was boiling. In a moment of desperate rage, he lunged for it, his intentions clear in his wild-eyed expression. Amaya and Alana ran away from the kitchen, screaming. Some of the other children followed them, but some stayed behind. "Stay back," Keanu shouted to the children, quickly ending his call and moving to intercept Victor. The remaining children shrank against the walls, their faces reflecting terror at the familiar threat of scalding water. "Victor, stop!" Keanu commanded. "This will only make things worse for you." Just as Victor's hands closed around the pot handle, the sound of police sirens pierced the air. The wail grew louder, signaling the rapid approach of law enforcement. Victor froze, the fight draining out of him, as the reality of his situation sank in. The pot clattered back onto the stove, spilling some of its contents onto the floor and splashing Victor's legs. He yelped in pain, stumbling backward. Within moments, police officers burst into the kitchen, quickly assessing the situation. 2 officers moved to restrain Victor, forcing his hands behind his back and securing him in handcuffs. "Sir, you have the right to remain silent," one officer began, reciting Victor's Miranda rights as they led him out of the kitchen. Another officer approached Keanu. "Are you the one who made the call, sir?" Keanu nodded, his eyes scanning the room for Amaya and Alana. "Yes, I am. These children need help. There's been ongoing abuse and neglect here, and 2 girls and some children ran out during the commotion. I need to find them." The officer nodded. "We'll conduct a thorough search of the premises, sir. Can you describe the girls and the children? How many of them?" As Keanu provided a description of Amaya and Alana, he couldn't shake the worry gnawing at him. He knew the twins had suffered greatly, and he was determined to ensure their safety. After giving his initial statement to the police, Keanu insisted on joining the search for the twins. He retraced his steps through the orphanage, his heart racing with each empty room he encountered. Finally, he reached the poor isolation room where he had first seen Amaya and Alana. Pushing the door open gently, he found the twins huddled in the corner, clinging to each other in fear. "Amaya? Alana?" Keanu called softly, crouching down to their level. "It's okay now, you're safe. Victor can't hurt you anymore." The girls looked up, their eyes wide with a mix of fear and hope. Keanu held out his hands, his voice gentle and reassuring. "The police are here now. They're going to make sure Victor never hurts you or any of the other children again. Can you come with me? We need to make sure you're okay." Slowly, hesitantly, Amaya and Alana uncurled from their protective huddle, their small bodies trembling as they approached Keanu. He could see the tears streaking down their faces, the fear etched into their young features. "Please, sir, we're so scared," Amaya whispered, her voice barely audible. "We're not sick with the flu." "That's okay, sweethearts," Keanu said gently, his voice soft and full of reassurance. "You're so brave. I promise you we'll find the kindest police officers and doctors who can help you recover and strong again. You're not alone anymore." Tears welled up in the twins' eyes as the full impact of the moment hit them. "Is it really over?" Alana whispered, her voice trembling. Keanu nodded, his own eyes misting over. "Yes, it's over. Victor can't hurt you anymore. There will be child protective services outside to help you." As the chaos of the police investigation swirled around them, Keanu led the girls outside and stayed with them, providing a steady, comforting presence. He watched as social workers gently coaxed stories from the other children, each revelation painting a clearer picture of the systemic abuse that had been occurring at Haven Hills. The weight of what he had uncovered settled heavily on Keanu's shoulders. He knew that his decision to return, to trust his instincts, had likely saved these children from years of continued suffering. As he looked around at the unfolding scene, he silently vowed to see this through, to ensure that Amaya, Alana, and all the children of Haven Hills would find the safety and care they deserved. The front lawn of the orphanage was a flurry of activity. Police cars with flashing lights illuminated the scene in alternating red and blue, while officers and social workers moved purposefully about. The wind carried snippets of conversations and the crackle of police radios. A gust of cool wind swept across the property as Keanu led the girls to one of the social workers. It was a quiet spot near a large oak tree, away from the immediate chaos. The afternoon air was crisp, rustling the overgrown grass and rattling the branches of nearby trees. It was a stark contrast to the stifling atmosphere inside Haven Hills. Keanu knelt down beside them, his presence calm and reassuring as he joined Lorraine, the social worker who was carefully gathering the children. His voice was soft, steady, and filled with warmth. "You're safe now," he said gently. "Can you tell me what happened? Why were you so scared of the boiling water?" Alana, the more vocal twin, looked at Keanu with tear-filled eyes. Her voice was barely above a whisper as she began to speak. "Victor, he'd use the hot water to punish us. He'd make us stand close to the steam. It hurt so much." Amaya nodded silently, her grip on her sister's hand tightening. Keanu felt a wave of anger and sadness wash over him at their revelation. Before he could respond, a commotion near the front of the building caught their attention. Victor's voice, loud and desperate, cut through the night air. "You can't do this! This is my property! I have rights!" Keanu, Lorraine, and the twins watched as two officers forcibly led Victor towards a waiting police car. His face was contorted with rage, all pretense of civility gone. As they neared the vehicle, Victor's eyes locked onto Keanu and the girls. "This is your fault, Reeves," he shouted, struggling against the officer's grip. "You've ruined everything. I'll sue you for everything you've got." Amaya and Alana shrank back, pressing closer to Keanu. He placed a protective arm around them, his voice steady as he addressed Victor. "No, Victor. You did this to yourself. These children deserved better, and now they'll get it." The officers managed to secure Victor in the back of the police car, his continued protests muffled as the door slammed shut. As the car pulled away, its tires crunching on the gravel driveway, Keanu felt the twins relax slightly beside him. Turning back to Amaya and Alana, Keanu spoke softly. "It's over now. He can't hurt you anymore." Alana looked up at Keanu, her voice trembling. "What's going to happen to us?" "We're arranging emergency foster care for all the children," Lorraine explained gently. "You'll be safe, I promise." The wind whipped her hair around her face as she crouched down next to them. Keanu watched as the reality of the situation sank in for the twins. Years of abuse and isolation were coming to an end, but the uncertainty of their future was clearly overwhelming. "Will we be together?" Amaya asked, her quiet voice nearly lost in the wind. Lorraine smiled reassuringly. "We'll do everything we can to keep you together. That's very important to us." As they spoke, other children from Haven Hills were being led to waiting vehicles, each clutching a small bag of belongings. The wind carried the sound of car doors opening and closing, engines starting. Keanu remained with Amaya and Alana, offering what comfort he could as they waited for their turn. The twins seemed reluctant to leave his side, their eyes constantly seeking him out for reassurance. As a car pulled up to take the twins, Keanu made a firm decision. He turned to Lorraine, his voice low yet resolute. "I want to help these children, especially Amaya and Alana. I want to see this place turned around, new management, new staff, a fresh start." Lorraine looked at him with a mix of hope and caution. "That's a noble goal, Keanu, and I'll support you in every way I can. But for now, the children need to be placed into emergency foster care. It's the safest option while we sort out the immediate needs and ensure they're protected." Keanu nodded without hesitation. "Thank you." He watched as Lorraine carefully buckled the twins into the back seat of the car. Amaya was clutching Alana's hand, her face still damp with tears, while Alana looked down at her hands, her small fingers nervously playing with the fabric of her sleeve. Keanu stepped closer, his voice gentle as he met their eyes. "Hey, you two. You're so brave, you know that? I promise things are going to get better for you from here." Amaya looked up at him, her eyes glistening but resolute. "Really?" she whispered. Keanu offered her a soft smile, his heart swelling with compassion. "I promise we'll meet again soon, okay?" Lorraine gave him a small, reassuring glance as she closed the car door. The sound of the door shutting felt final yet hopeful. She looked back at Keanu once more. "They're in good hands now. We'll make sure they're protected." Keanu nodded without hesitation, his voice steady and heartfelt. "Thank you." The car's engine roared to life, and Keanu watched as it pulled away from the orphanage. His heart ached as he saw the small figures of Amaya and Alana in the back seat, their eyes peeking out the window as they began their journey to safety. He stood there for a moment, alone with the sound of the wind in the trees and the distant rumble of the departing vehicle. A bittersweet feeling lingered in his chest, a mix of relief and uncertainty. But as he watched them go, he felt a glimmer of hope, a quiet promise. This was just the beginning. It was then that he saw her, the old woman Merida Lafayette. She was standing by the old front steps of the orphanage, her hands clasped together in front of her, her expression a mix of relief and uncertainty as she watched the other staff were interviewed by the polices. Walking toward her, he cleared his throat as he approached. "Merida," he said, his voice calm but full of emotion. She looked up at the sound of his voice, startled for a moment, but her features softened when she saw him. "Mr. Reeves," she said, her voice steady but surprised. "I wanted to thank you," he began, his tone earnest. "Your letter, your words, moved me deeply. They brought me here today, and because of that, I've been able to step in and help these children. You saved them, in ways you probably don't even know. Thank you for sharing your truth with me." Merida glanced down for a moment, her hands nervously tugging at her jacket. I'm just so relieved you came," she said softly. "I wasn't sure if anyone would pay attention to an old woman like me, so I sent the letter. I didn't know if my words would ever make an impact, but I'm glad I wrote it. I knew Victor was inviting some celebrity here, but only you actually came." Keanu shook his head gently, his voice low and heartfelt. "Your letter truly touched me, more than you can possibly know. I also thank you for your help earlier, for giving me access to the kitchen and the chance to save the children." She looked back up at him, her voice carrying a note of genuine humility. "It was my mission, the least I could do," she said. "I just wanted someone to see the suffering here and care enough to act. I'm so glad you did." Keanu paused, his gaze thoughtful as he spoke again. "Merida, if I move forward with plans to re-establish Haven Hills, bringing in new management, new resources, and giving these children a real chance, I'd love for you to stay in touch. Your experience, your compassion, and your perspective would mean the world to this mission." Merida hesitated for a moment, looking at him with a mix of hope and uncertainty. Then finally she nodded. "I'd be honored, Mr. Reeves," she said with a warm smile. "I'll be glad to help in any way I can, as long as I have the strength left in this body." Keanu offered her a warm smile, his voice steady and full of gratitude. "Good. Thank you, Merida, truly. You've already done so much by being here and sharing your words." She smiled faintly, the weight of her emotions evident in her expression, but accompanied by newfound determination. "Then let's see what the future holds," she said. Keanu stood for a moment beside Merida, the quiet of the evening settling over them, as the wind tugged gently at her hair. He looked at her one last time, a deep sense of gratitude in his voice, as he prepared to leave. "Well," he said with a soft smile, "I guess this is where we part ways for now. Thank you again. For everything." She returned his smile, her voice steady but kind. "Take care of those children, Keanu. You're doing important work." Keanu nodded, taking a deep breath. "I'll do my best. I'll be in touch." He turned and began walking back toward his car, his footsteps steady. Merida stayed where she was, watching him go for a moment. As he reached his vehicle, he glanced back one last time, and she raised a hand in a small, quiet wave. Keanu pulled his phone from his pocket as he slid into his car, the cold air hitting him as he started the engine. With one hand on the wheel and his focus steady, he pulled out his phone and dialed Michael's number. The connection was almost instant. "Hey, Michael," he said as the call connected, his voice calm and resolute. "I need you to find out everything about Haven Hills Children's Home, its property, its acquisition, and anything related to its ownership. There's something important I need to discuss with you." "Keanu," Michael said as he approached. "What's going on?" Michael's voice came through on the other end, steady and professional. Keanu, what's going on? Keanu took a deep breath as he eased his car out of the parking lot. The sound of the engine roared beneath him, but his mind was clear. I think we have a real opportunity here, he began. Victor, the owner of the orphanage, has let this place fall into disrepair, and these children have suffered because of it. I want to purchase Haven Hills Children's Home from him, bring in new management, new staff, and give these kids a real chance at safety and stability. There was a pause on the line. Michael's voice was thoughtful when he finally replied. You're serious about this, he said. You want to buy the orphanage and rebuild it from the ground up? Keanu nodded to himself, his grip tightening slightly on the steering wheel. Yes, we'll discuss the details soon, but I believe this is the right thing to do. I've seen enough to know that these children deserve better. They deserve a fresh start. I want to give them that opportunity. The financials might be complicated, but I truly believe we can make this happen. Michael exhaled slowly, his tone measured. It'll take resources, Keanu. You'll need financing, legal backing, and the right strategy to work through Victor's ownership and any complications that might arise. But if you're serious, we can make it happen. Keanu's voice grew stronger, more resolute as he spoke. I'm serious. I'll handle the financials if we can sort out the legal side. I trust you'll help me navigate the process. This isn't just a business move, Michael. It's a mission, and I want this to be kept away from press, at least for now. Michael was silent for a moment, his voice low when he finally spoke again. All right, he said. I'll review the property's ownership, outline the legal steps, and start drafting a proposal. If you're committed to this, I'll make sure you have a clear path to move forward. Keanu allowed himself a small, hopeful smile as he drove through the empty streets. Thank you, Michael. I knew I could count on you. Michael's voice held warmth and encouragement. We'll get to work. This can be the beginning of something good, something they all deserve. Keanu hung up the call as he navigated his way through the quiet streets. The weight of responsibility lingered, but so did hope. His journey was just beginning, but he could feel the first rays of change on the horizon. As Keanu drove toward the horizon, the cloudy sky was beginning to lighten up, casting a golden glow of evening over the quiet streets. The weight of the journey ahead pressed on him, but so did the promise of change, the promise that this new beginning could rewrite the story for the children of Haven Hills. With Michael's guidance and his own determination, Keanu knew the path would be challenging, but it would be worth every step. The road stretched out before him, full of uncertainty but also hope. For the first time in a long time, Keanu felt certain. This was the start of something meaningful, a chance to heal, to rebuild, and to give those who had been forgotten a brighter, safer tomorrow.